Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of SEPA Paranormal Chronicles. Today, I am delighted to have Ann McDougall with us. Ann is a writer, actor, graphic designer living in the centre of the universe, more commonly known as Toronto. Ann, welcome.
Hello, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so the centre of the universe thing is a little bit of a dig at Toronto because they think they are centre of the universe, but they're not because Ottawa is. But that's just my personal opinion.
In fairness, I am originally from Northern Ontario. I'm from the Thunder Bay area, so I'm willing to accept that Toronto is not the center of the universe, even though it is my home.
Okay, so the new center of the universe is Thunder Bay. Okay, let's go with that then. So, Anne, what I normally like to do at the very beginning is to get people's stories on how their paranormal road started. So if you can just give us a little bit of information about yourself and tell us about how your paranormal life began.
Absolutely. So I spent a big portion of my career working in historic house museums. So museums that are based in a real historic site, a real place, a real time. I worked in a bunch in Ontario, both in Northern Ontario and here in the Toronto area. And what I found in my time working there was not so much that I had paranormal experiences. To be really honest, I didn't have any major paranormal experience, but people would come in on a daily basis, and the first question they'd want to know is it haunted? And then when I told them the answer, which was either, maybe some people have experienced things, maybe nothing, they would immediately want to tell me their story of being haunted and their story of a ghost experience. And early in my career, I found I would get a little bit riled by that because I'd say, "No, you're here for the history." Internally, why are they asking these questions? But as I got a little older, I mellowed down a little bit, and I got really curious about why people wanted to have these conversations in historic houses because they're old spaces, of course, but there are old spaces everywhere. Well, what was it about museums that made people want to talk about ghosts? And what came out of that was a couple of years ago, I wrote an essay about working in museums and all of the people who would come in and ask me questions and tell me their stories of being haunted. And that essay was longlisted for the CBC Nonfiction Prize. It didn't go any further, but a publisher reached out to me and said, "Are you interested in writing a book about ghosts in museums?" And I said, "Oh, yes, I am." But I realized I didn't just want to do museum ghost stories because there are already a lot of great books of museum ghost stories. What really interested me was why people wanted to talk about ghosts in these spaces, and also why people and how people try to talk to ghosts in general. I found I was less interested in what happens, when someone just sort of living their life and happens to be haunted or happens to have a paranormal experience, and more interested in how people seek them out and why they seek them out. So that's what the book is about. It's called A Ghost in the Room, and I investigated all sorts of things relating to museums and ghosts and spiritualism and paranormal investigation with this sort of, I guess, cultural lens of being a museum person and asking, why do we do this and why is this important to us?
That sounds a pretty cool story. So the fact that you got asked by this publisher, and obviously to write a book is quite a daunting experience. But before we go into that, have you actually experienced anything personally when doing all this research and investigations?
So it's been a really interesting process because I went in and I had in museums, in these historic houses, the kind of experiences that a lot of people, if they're already inclined to believe in the paranormal, will say, yes, that was a ghost experience. You experienced the feeling of something watching you. You experienced a creepy feeling. That's a paranormal experience. But that sort of feeling I would describe as sort of on the cusp of it could be a paranormal experience. It could be something else. It could just be an uneasy feeling. We're not quite sure. In the course of my research, I realized that people really do have experiences that are far more vivid than that. I met a lot of people and who really do see, they really do hear, they really do experience ghosts, and I've come to realize that's a very common thing. In the course of my research, I had a lot more of those sort of cusp experience where it was like, is this something paranormal? Is this something else? is this something that's happening in our own, in my brain, in my body, which is also to me very interesting if that's the case. I wouldn't say I had like a really definitive ghost experience. I was left with the feeling that there are a lot of things we don't understand about our own minds, about this research, about the universe that we live in. And so I was left maybe with more questions than answers, but in a way that I found very satisfying personally.
And I can totally agree with what you've just said, because there was a long period of my life where I was the 100%, I nearly said cryptic, 100% skeptic was the word I'm looking for. Look, it's early on a Saturday morning. You're going to have to forgive me. Yeah, I was 100% skeptic, and I would completely blank everything as being, oh, well, I must have knocked that thing earlier for it to fall off the shelf, or what I just saw out of the corner of my eye was a trick of the light and stuff like that. And for the longest time, I like completely debunked every single thing
Mm-hmm.
until the point that I started to investigate. And then you get completely different things that happen that you cannot explain. And like you've just said about having individuals coming up you with individual stories, there's too many experiences that people have it's happened to for there not to be something.
Mm-hmm.
But what that something is, we may never know.
Yeah, and I think in the skeptical world or in the scientific world, there's a tendency among people to be really dismissive of these questions, to say, well, this is a silly thing to be thinking about. This is unscientific. Let's not consider it. But what I've come to realize, I don't think it's silly to ask these questions at all. Because I think, first of all, if you look at the history of paranormal research, which I did a lot in this book because I'm a history person, there have been a lot of times when someone has started off researching something completely paranormal, like telepathy, only to discover something that's very concrete and scientific, like brainwaves. And that's happened again and again. And so I don't think it is at all silly to take these questions seriously and to take these experiences seriously. And what I've come to realize also about people who do paranormal investigation is there's really nothing silly about them. Like asking these questions, these are intelligent, serious people who are trying to make sense of their own experiences. And I've developed quite a lot of respect for that in the course of writing this book.
I could not agree more, because what SEPA do, we will investigate the rational stuff first. So if you've got noises in your attic, we will look for rodents. We will look for loose tiles. Yeah, if you're experiencing like apparitions, we will check your electrical equipment that it's not giving off large amounts of EMF that can cause hallucinations. And we do all that kind of stuff before we start playing with the gadgets
Mm.
and to actually try to communicate with spirits and ghosts, of course, if they exist. And I think that's the correct way to go about it.
Hmm.
So, have you actually been out with any paranormal teams to do these
I
investigations?
have, yeah. So one of the things I did, there's a wonderful museum in Kitchener, Ontario, which is Homer Watson House and Gardens. They're wonderful. And they are a really interesting site because not only are they a beautiful historic house museum, but the resident of the home, Homer Watson, was a spiritualist himself and a very sort of dedicated investigator in the early 20th century. And for that reason, they focus a lot of their sort of, Halloween season programming on, they call it spirit season, and they focus a lot on very sincere investigation because that's the history of the house. And so they partner with TOPS, which is the Ontario Paranormal Society, who do public paranormal investigations as part of their programming. So I participated in one of those. It was my first time ever sort of investigating with equipment, and it was a fascinating experience because I was struck by how meticulous and thoughtful they were in their research approach. And also, it had never really occurred to me before, but how human they were in their approach. Again and again, they emphasized that ghosts, if they exist, are the ghosts of people, they're human beings. They need to be spoken to like human beings. They did a lot of really interesting things, like considering the time period of the people they thought they might be investigating and what sort of tools would they respond to, what knowledge base would they have. And I was really taken with how human their approach was and how thoughtful of the people they might be communicating with was, even though, and they know this, they don't really, we don't really know the nature of exactly what's happening. There was this sort of very open-minded humanistic approach. It was really neat.
Yeah. So was that your very first investigation?
That was my first time. Previously to that, I had done some like ghost walks and ghost tours where you would dabble a little bit with different tools, but that was the first paranormal investigation, and it was just really interesting. And what I loved about it was because it was for someone like me, a member of the public who'd never experienced it. They really took the time to lay out what they were doing, what tools they were using, to show us a range of strategies. And I, as a museum person, I love a thorough explanation. So I was really,
Yeah.
really quite taken with it.
So how did your expectations before to what you experienced and what you know afterwards compare?
I would say I am much more respectful of the process. Like, I think I went in with a bit of preconception that, this is unscientific, this is maybe a little bit fanciful. And I came out feeling as though this is actually quite serious and rigorous to the point that it can be. We're looking for something whose nature we simply don't understand. And if you don't understand the nature of something, it means you don't understand really how to look for it. We don't know where it is. We don't know what the rules are. We don't know what the science is. And so we're sort of scanning this broad band of possible ways to communicate. And I have a lot of respect. A lot of early scientific endeavors involve a lot of looking in the dark and trying to figure things out, and taking the tiny scraps of information you have. And so I've come out with a real sort of respect and excitement for that work, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it absolutely does perfectly. And like you've just said, there's a lot of gadgets out there, and we want to call ourselves scientifically based, so we do the science first. And we know that some of these devices that people use can be manipulated by walkie talkies, by cell phones. So we make sure that we completely remove those from the equation so that we're not getting any false positives. But then we have, like, say, my friend Logan, who's part of the team. He has so many different devices to trying to communicate. And one particular device that you're going to find really interesting. We went to a place in Brockville, nice, lovely, stately home, hadn't been investigated before. And there was one room that was described as a library stroke smoking room by the previous owner. And he had so you're aware of what a REM pod is. So there's many different varieties, and this particular REM pod was in the shape of a cigarette box, with the antenna was a cigarette sticking out the top. So we put it on the floor in the smoking room, and nobody was anywhere near it. And when I say nowhere near it, you're talking 30, 40 feet away. We were doing an Estes method, so with the headphones, yeah.
Oh, yes, I've
And
tried that.
yeah, that's really cool. And one of the guys that was doing the Estes method just came out with smoking, and as soon as he came out with that, the REM pod went off.
Oh, interesting.
Like I say, and there was nowhere near it. Logan ran across to make sure that there was nobody in the room, and as he started walking back, the guy doing the Estes said smoking again, and the REM pod went off again.
So
And it's like,
fascinating.
that is so cool. Can we debunk it? No, we can't.
Yeah.
But it's that kind of interaction that really gets people intrigued and interested in what we do. Even when you watch a few TV shows, it's some of it is a little bit corny, and you can go, "Oh my god, did they really do that?" But when you do it correctly and for the right reasons, you can have so much fun and you can learn so much information.
Yeah, I think I was quite surprised by the difference between what I had seen on TV and what people are actually doing in the real world. There's a lot less running and shouting than
Oh
I
yes,
expected, and a lot more sort of meticulous sitting and watching and thinking and long hours. And I sort of like almost citizen science side of it. Like, I think we live in a world where people don't always feel empowered to try to understand the world around them. You know the things you learned growing up and you don't think necessarily too hard about it otherwise. And what I think paranormal investigators are doing right is asking deep questions about what is our world, how does it work, how do our experiences fit into what we know, and actually trying to find those answers. And I have a lot of respect for anyone who takes that approach.
That's it. And sort of like when you go into work on the Monday and go, "Oh, what did you do at the weekend?" "Oh, I sat in a dark room talking to myself for a few hours." So like, so you did what? So, a ghost in the room. You mentioned that you got approached by a publisher,
Yes.
and like I said earlier, to write a book is not an easy process. So, after this publisher approached you, what was your first steps with writing a ghost in the room?
So I started thinking about my own experiences because I knew I wanted to look at the paranormal through this lens of museums. Because for a reason that I think, at least in my own museum practice, I'd never really thought about why do people want to have these conversations in a museum space? Why here of all places? You come with your school, you're going to learn about the 19th century. Why do we go to ghosts, and why do we go to ghosts so frequently? Like every single day, people would come in and ask about them, to the point that it was one of the most popular topics of conversation, even though it wasn't something, in the museum we were trained on. It wasn't something that was in our history. And so I got really curious. And so I sort of broke the book into three parts. One part was my own sort of memoirs of working in museums, how that would relate to the paranormal, whether it was a paranormal TV show coming into a museum to film, or whether it was a Halloween program that we had put together looking at seances and the paranormal. That was sort of one bucket. The next was to look at other museums and what they're doing today. So, how do they handle ghosts in their programming? Because there's a real swing in museums. We always have to think about what is popular versus what is educational. And so there can be a real swing. Sometimes you do lots of ghost programming because it's popular and people want it. And then sometimes the pendulum swings back and you say, no, we're rigorous, we're historical, we're going to focus on only the facts. And so it's, how do you navigate that boundary? And then the third sort of bucket that I brought, that I think the publisher wasn't expecting at first, was that I wanted to sort of investigate on my own, how do people do this? So what are paranormal investigations? What are other techniques that people use? I wound up doing quite a bit of research into the Spiritualist Church, which is, of course, a historical body that did a lot of spirit communication, but they still exist today. And a lot of people, they take quite a different tack on this. It's a religion for them. And so this is their faith. And so I did a lot of hands-on, whether it was paranormal investigations, whether it was going to seances, going to Spiritualist Church services. And so I sort of organized those three things. And then I just went out and started doing things. And I realized pretty quickly that there was so much to write about, because there's really not one approach to the paranormal. There's a lot of people doing a lot of different things out there and who are very passionate about what they're doing. So I did workshops and seminars and church services and investigations. And it was all, I would describe it as kind of weird and wonderful. It was all really, really fascinating. And that became sort of the core of the book, was this sort of investigation side of it.
So, when did this actually start to be created?
So the original essay I wrote was in 2022. And then about 6 months later, I was talking with the publisher and things were not nailed down yet. It wasn't necessarily going to be a book, but I decided I wanted to write it. This was a topic I had actually been fascinated with for a while. During the pandemic, I found a book from the early 20th century, just around the turn of the century, that was written by a magician named David Abbott. And it was a book of tricks used in seances by fraudulent mediums in seances. And it was written as an informational book, basically to warn people away from these. And I got so fascinated by it, by all of these tricks and how people were fooled and why you would do this in the first place. And so this had been a topic rattling around in my brain for a long time. So I decided to just go for it. And I went to a spiritualist church in Southern Ontario. And I went because they were hosting what's called an international medium. And an international medium is someone, this one was from the UK, it's someone who makes their career out of going to different spiritualist churches in the world, and there are hundreds worldwide, and doing what's called platform mediumship, which is when they will give you messages from the dead sort of live in front of an audience. And I decided to go see what that was like because, mediumship is so core to spiritualism. It always has been historically. And I wanted to experience that. And one of the things I was interested in was I didn't think that this medium would be fraudulent because this, spiritualism is a faith and most of the people who do it are very sincere. And so I thought this would be a person who was sincerely giving messages from the dead and either actually doing that, or even if they were imagining they were doing it, they would be, doing it sincerely. But I wanted to have some kind of test for fraud. And so I thought, gosh, how can I do this? I don't know. And finally, the method I devised was I invented a childhood dog. And I never had a dog in childhood. I never had a pet growing up. I invented a childhood dog and I used AI to make a picture of this lovely dog that was very realistic. And then I posted it on social media on my Twitter account as though it were real. And I put it there as a test. And I thought, if this medium is doing what's called hot reading, which is looking people up beforehand, this is a pretty obvious test, but just in case, I will leave it on my social media, with a little post about how this is my childhood dog. And it'll be there, and this can be an ongoing test for hot reading. I really didn't think I was going to experience it. But I went to this church and I went to this session, and it was really quite beautiful as spiritualist churches tend to be. There was, singing, there was this really positive energy. And then this medium came in and he began giving people readings. And the whole thing was very moving. And I was really taken by how accurate so many of the messages were. But his manner was so confident, and he himself seemed such a lovely guy. And I was really taken with it. And I thought, either this person is just so sensitive and intuitive that perhaps he's picking things up from people, or maybe he truly is psychic. Maybe he really can look into people. Maybe he really is getting these messages. Like, I was really taken with it. And then toward the end of the meeting, all of a sudden, this is a crowd of maybe 100 people. He pointed right at me and he said, "You, madam, did you have a dog growing up?" And I sort of went, "Oh no." And then he began to describe the picture, that perfectly described this picture. And it became very clear that the reason he was such a good medium was that he had been looking at the social media of the attendees and looking at workshops they were attending and looking at things they'd posted about their relatives. And it was sort of a fascinating experience because on one hand, it was disappointing. I had really sort of experienced in a very short period of time going from being quite skeptical to really believing and thinking, this is amazing, and then to realizing it was a hoax. But that experience also made me realize how utterly convincing, first of all, an experience like that can be, and how emotionally satisfying an experience like that can be. And that was really my first clue into why we look so hard for ghosts and why they're so important to us, and why we want so much to be haunted is because we have these experiences that are very real, and we have these emotional connections to people who have departed that are very intense. And so of course we want to do these investigations. And then unfortunately there's also an ecosystem, especially in sort of the faith side of things, of fraud that's willing to prey on people who have this very intense desire to connect with the afterlife. So coming out of that first investigation session, before I knew this was really going to be a book, before I really knew anything, I sort of came out and said, wow, there's something really interesting here. And I know there's something to write about. And that was kind of my first step.
Yeah. And after what you've just said, that also tells me there must have been a way that how he knew who was going to be in attendance. So the location were obviously involved with that as well.
Yeah.
Because
I
he's not
think,
just going to go through random
yeah.
social media pages because he's not going to know who's attending. So if he knew that you was attending, somebody must have told him.
That's it. And when I walked in, someone was standing on the porch and holding a clipboard and going down the clipboard, and they asked me my name. And so, of course, I think what happened then was that he saw the name, knew I was ticked off, looked at me, and honestly, must have quite a good memory for names and faces. and
Yeah.
gone, oh yes, that's Ann McDougall. That's the lady who posted about the dog. I was actually a little bit surprised that he didn't suspect the dog tweet as suspicious because I posted it right before, the day before I
Yeah.
went. But I think on the other hand, this is probably someone who's not used to being debunked because he's working in a space where people come in with a very high level of belief. Like it's a space where people want to believe, where they deeply want to reconnect with loved ones, where they've maybe had paranormal experiences that make them believe in the first place. And so they're not necessarily going in with a mind towards skepticism and debunking in the first place. And I
Yeah.
think, unfortunately, that allows frauds to thrive. There's this sort of, I think, a small ecosystem of frauds who prey on these people, but then also a much larger group of people who are sincerely trying to communicate and investigate and figure it out. And I do want to say that just because those frauds exist, it doesn't discredit what everyone else is doing, because
No.
most people I met were deeply sincere and having these experiences they couldn't quite explain and trying to find a way to explain them and to understand them. And that I have profound respect for.
Yeah, because I know of an individual who's one of the biggest skeptics in the world, and he's quite renowned on UK and now US TV. And many moons ago, he was on a TV show where he doubted the reliability of a particular medium. And what he did, he created two names and put them on a document on a table. And later on, this medium actually picked up on these two names and said that they were spirits in the room. But then he actually said, well, this is actually a anagram of the word medium faker, and called the guy out, and the guy got fired from the TV show.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So yeah, it is the fact that there are people out there that are willing to manipulate people for their own kudos, if you want to call it that. So did you actually do anything with the information that you found? Did you kind of
Oh,
send them
did I
send them an
call them up?
email and just
I
yeah,
didn't. And that was for two reasons. One was that I was at the beginning of my investigation. And so I didn't want to, I knew I wanted to go to other spiritualist churches. I knew I wanted to interact with other mediums. And it is a small world, if that makes sense. So I didn't want to tip my hand and put other mediums on their guard. And then the other reason I didn't, to be perfectly honest, is that I didn't think it would make a big difference. But what I found was that when people are truly believing, when they're really, really focused in their belief, they are aware of the presence of frauds, but they will rationalize fraud to sort of support this belief. And I understand that because this belief, it's really rooted in a desire to reconnect with the people you love. You don't want to hear that it's wrong. You don't want to hear that perhaps you've been fooled, especially if you had an incredibly profound experience. And so I found that when people were confronted with tales of fraud, there was a real tendency to rationalize them as, oh, you know, maybe she got that information from you psychically. You hear that a lot. Someone would say, oh, yeah, it was fake, but it was in your mind. So they got it from you psychically. I found actually throughout my research that debunking the paranormal often is less effective than you would think. Like there are a lot of cases. One of the things I investigated was, or looked into the history of, was Mackenzie House here in Toronto, which is a wonderful historic house museum, one of my favorites. But it has this really intense reputation as being the most haunted house in Canada or the most haunted house in Toronto. People really walk around with that belief. You hear a lot about Mackenzie House. And in my research, I found that in the 60s, there was a flurry of media coverage about Mackenzie House being the most haunted house. There were a lot of newspaper articles, and there were also there was a TV spot on CBC. And that's where that belief comes from. But a couple of years after all those articles came out, a couple of years after the TV spot, someone spoke to the Mackenzie Homestead Foundation, which was the original foundation that built the museum, and they admitted to a newspaper that the ghost story was entirely made up. It was just a hoax. They had hoped that they might get some local media coverage and drum up publicity for the new museum, And then it got out of control, and it was picked up by newspapers
Oops.
across the country. It was picked up by newspapers in the US. It became this huge thing, and it went out of control. And so they fully admitted to this. And the wild thing is, it didn't matter. Like this was a completely debunked thing. And if you speak to staff at Mackenzie House today, they'll happily tell you about the perception of the house being haunted, but they themselves, they don't have these experiences. It's just, at least to them, not a particularly haunted house. But it doesn't matter because of all of the media coverage. People have in their minds that Mackenzie House is haunted. And just a couple of years after that article came out, the same stories started recirculating in media, getting borrowed again. By the late 60s, you have all these stories about a school teacher coming in with her class, and they all believe it's haunted. And that perception has never gone away. And so I discovered that debunking, oddly, is very difficult. It is really hard to debunk, which is a shame because I think it actually clouds the sort of sincere investigation side of things, right? It's hard because on one hand, you can produce evidence, you can also produce debunking, but if people ignore one or the other, it becomes very hard to find the truth. So that was an interesting layer to all of this.
Yeah, because I've got evidence that of EVPs and visual evidence. I know what I saw. I know what I heard. I don't care what other people think because I know that I saw this at this particular time at this particular location. And when we was talking before we came on air about my pictures and stuff, last night I was interviewing somebody that could astral project. So I got her to put it to the test. So that, and she's in California. I've never met her face to face, and I won't go into the full story because obviously it's an episode. But I asked her what was basically in front of my computer, and I wanted her to be quite specific about what was on my speaker. But then she went, "You've got toys there," and as I showed you earlier, I've got toys there, and she said they're action figures. So it's like,
Wow.
hang on a minute. She's in California. How would she know that I've got action figures there? Sort of like, not everybody, like you probably haven't got action figures.
I do not.
Exactly. So how would she pick up on something like that? There's a few other things. She got a couple of things slightly wrong, but there was a couple of things, and I'd like to say, I'm not going to tell you now. I might tell you off air later. But there's one thing that she actually got absolutely spot on, and it's like, how the hell do you know that? So there's got to be something into it, 100%. And I was working with a medium in February and was at a little jail just between here and Montreal, near a place called Hawkesbury. And she was saying, "Oh, there's 3 floors to this jail." And I went, "No, there's the ground floor and the first floor." She went, "No, there's 3 floors." And she was adamant there was 3 floors. And I knew that the last 3 people to be hung in that jail were buried in the courtyard, but I did not tell her that.
Wow.
Because I like putting these things to the test. And she's going, "No, there's 3 floors." And I went, "No, there isn't. There's only ever been 2, the ground floor and the first floor." Or, in North America, the first floor and the second floor.
Right.
But then at the end, she went, "Is there anything you want to tell me?" And I went, "You mentioned about there being 3 floors." She went, "Yeah." And I went, and there was a lot of snow around, so she didn't manage to go into the courtyard. So she may not have picked up on the 3 guys that were buried. And I went, "The courtyard, there's 3 people buried." And she went, "They're buried about 6 foot under, aren't they?" And I went, I guess so, because she went, "There's your 3rd floor."
Oh, wow.
And it's like, she did not know about the people being buried there. Well, you'd like to think she did not know.
Yeah.
But she didn't definitely say, "Oh, there's 3 people buried in the courtyard." She was just pushing this 3rd floor scenario.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, and it was like, if you had looked up on it, you would have known that 3 people were buried. But she didn't come out with that. She didn't, because we'd like to say we didn't really touch the courtyard. So the fact that she said there's a 3rd floor,
Yeah.
and it kind of like I was really impressed with that.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, and it does make, it's not what is practically there or visible, but it's their perception of
Mm-hmm.
what they see, and they could see somebody at a different level, which
Yeah. Do you mind if I ask you? Because I'm so curious. Like, as someone who's very in the world of paranormal investigation, what do you think is sort of the most promising technology or technique for getting this sort of hard evidence that people are looking for?
that. Hang on, I thought I was asking you the question.
Sorry,
Okay,
I know I'm flipping this on you, but I'm so curious.
yeah. So that's a very difficult question to ask because there's a lot of technology out there and a lot of gadgets that are just gadgets for the for people creating them to make money.
Mm-hmm.
If you buy a gadget that's got the word ghost or spirit at the beginning of it, you can guarantee it's going to be more expensive.
Mm-hmm.
So if you, for example, have an audio recorder and I was at a different jail and I'm asking if there's anybody there, please make a sign, make a sound. At the end of my sentence, I heard a double breath. It wasn't me. I've got a background in emergency services, so I know how people breathe. I know how people, how the innards of a person works. I knew it was not me that did this double breath. So I sent it to a friend of mine for analysis, and he broke it down into voice waves. And he goes, "Yeah, this is your voice wave, and the double breath is this voice wave." And it was two completely different voice waves.
Mm.
So he could say this double breath was not you. So I'm not a big fan of some of the devices that are out there, but audio devices, even though they can be altered and adjusted, an audio device will pick up a lot of like evidence that you don't hear in real time.
Mm.
So I absolutely abide by the basics. But then you've got something like the Spirit Box, which is a white noise device. You've done the Estes, so you know
Yeah.
what I'm talking
Yeah.
about, and it scans radio waves. But people could say, well, it it's picking up the odd words from the radio station, which okay, it may be doing that. However, I'm a firm believer in whatever words are coming out of any device, whether it's an app, a spirit box, an ovulus, or whatever, you should not and cannot fit the words to the investigation. The words have to fit the investigation. And a
Mm.
perfect example of that, if you ask what day it is and it comes up with a day of the week, it probably doesn't have to be the correct day of the week. But if it comes out with a day of the week, that is still relevant. If you ask what day of the week it is and it comes out with beefcake,
Mm-hmm.
it's complete. You can't put beefcake into that sentence, but you can put a day of the week into that category.
And how is it, do you think, or what do you think is the best method for trying to stop yourself as the investigator from making sense or building a narrative around whatever words you get? Do you know what I mean? Because one thing
Yeah,
I found was there was a lot, and I found this both in paranormal investigation and in sort of spiritualist mediums. There was this idea of you get what you get, and that's the story. But I found it was hard not to try to build whatever words you get into a story. And one of the things I wrote about in the book is that I'm an actor and I have a background in improv, and in improvising, it's very much about the brain's ability to get whatever stimulus and you just go with it. You build a story around it. And I think like our brains are these natural pattern making machines. And I found myself whenever we were doing investigation or getting messages, there was this real impulse to go, okay, I got the word water, and water kind of makes sense because this might have been near a river, and there's a real desire to build a narrative. So how do you, as an investigator, guard against that?
again, I'm asking the questions.
Sorry. I don't know if you can tell how much this
Yeah,
fascinates me.
I know. So that's a very good question. But what I'm also a firm believer in, and if you haven't heard of these expressions, please tell me. You've got pareidolia and auditory pareidolia.
Mm-hmm.
So for those that don't know, pareidolia is the face of Jesus on a toast,
Yeah.
or you spill something and you see a face on the floor, that or the face of a devil in flames. Pareidolia. If the brain does not know what it's looking at, it will try to make it into something that you understand.
Mm-hmm.
Hence, it will try to change it into a recognizable feature like a face.
Yeah.
Auditory pareidolia is exactly the same. If you hear a noise that sounds like something, your brain potentially could make you hear that sound.
Yeah.
And a perfect example of that, we were investigating at a jail, and there was a spirit box kind of device, and we like putting these things seriously to the test. And my friend Logan said, "Yeah, if you are here, please call out one of our names." And there was three of us. There was myself, Lee, Logan, and Volta. Volta is not a common name. The guy's from Brazil. And there was some noises coming out, and then we heard what sounded like "we," as in yes in French. So Logan goes, "Okay, we just heard 'we,'" and I went, "Potentially, but could it also have been trying to say Lee?" And Logan's going, "That's a very good point." But there are certain examples of spirit box interaction where it does come out with a perfectly clear word.
Mm-hmm.
So again, I was at one of the locations, got the spirit device, and I asked how many people had died in this cell, and pure and clear came out was the word 4. Was it related to the question? Possibly.
Mm-hmm.
Can I categorically 100% prove that it was not a coincidence? No.
Right.
But the word 4 came out and it was clear. So there are examples of a absolute clear word coming out that is in relation to the investigation that you're carrying out. But a lot of them are noises that sound like words, which that's very difficult to decipher to what that word's saying. And I was at another investigation at a place near Mississippi Mills, the other side of Ottawa, and I'm walking in a room by myself, and I just hear psst, like someone's trying to get my attention.
Oh, wow.
I've got a body cam, I've got a camera, and I've got an audio device. I heard it with my plain ears. I automatically spin round because I think that someone's trying to get my attention, and there's nobody about.
Wow.
I then go, right, did I brush past a table or a chair? So on the camera, you can see me walking back and forth to try to replicate that, and I couldn't replicate it. Somebody said, "Oh, it might be a car." I'm sorry, but what kind of car makes that kind of sound?
Oh, yeah, no.
Well, it might have been one of your sneakers, and I was wearing soft shoes. I've never heard that sound come from a sneaker, and I could not confirm what it was, and I could not debunk it. I sent it to a different person that I know, and because it was audio and video, he sent it to one of his guys who deals with that as a profession, and he went, "The video was not tampered with, the audio was not added, it's not anything that we recognize." You could hear like a fridge freezer in the background, you got that hum.
Yeah.
You could hear a high pitched of a smoke alarm that the battery needed, like that beep kind of thing. But it wasn't anything like that. It was a basic psst, and we cannot debunk what that is.
Wow.
So, there's those kind of pieces of evidence that you can use, and people can go, well, it might be this, it might be that. And at the end of the day, the words "it might be" can be used so many times.
Yeah.
But if you get a real clear piece of evidence, then you can categorically say, well, that was definitely that word because we heard it. And if other people don't tell them what, what you think it is. What do you think of this? Oh, it's saying the word cat, or it's saying the word dog. And if multiple people come back with that thing straight away, you can pretty much say, okay, that's the word that we hear, and then you can move forward and investigate it more.
Well, I guess that's where the audio really comes in, right? The
exactly,
good, audio technology.
Yeah,
interesting.
Exactly. But like I say, you've got a lot of these devices that, if you press a walkie-talkie, they will go off. And we had a REM pod at a location, and this location didn't have any air conditioning. It was last July, and Volta unplugged this fan so we could do some, and the REM pod went off, and we thought, well, that's weird. So he goes, well, it might be because you unplugged the fan. Plug it in again. Plugged it in, REM pod went off. Unplugged it, REM pod went off. So the power surge caused by the unplugging and plugging of the fan caused enough EMF to set the REM pod off. So, yeah, I probably really extended that answer, but it's very difficult to 100% confirm the words that you find.
Yeah.
Because we posted a video on our Facebook page, and Logan put that it sounded like a child laughing, and it does, but then someone said, well, it sounds like a metal chair being dragged. It sounds like this. So we kind of then come back and go, okay, well, yeah, there's no metal chairs in that room. We know where everybody was stood, and there was nobody near the audio device. So for people that are there, they can debunk any kind of statements that other people come out with, because they were there and these people weren't. So it's very easy for us to go, well, it wasn't a car, it wasn't this, it wasn't that, because we were there, you was not.
Yeah.
And these people that hear this or see this are coming out with what they presume that it is, rather than what it definitely is. But we never say, oh, this was a ghost, this was a ghostly voice that we've heard. We just go, this piece of evidence is unexplained. And we put it on an unexplained pile. But unfortunately, that pile's getting bigger and bigger.
Right. And that's why you keep investigating. That makes sense.
Exactly. So let's go back to A Ghost in the Room. Do you want? And there's no point in telling me the whole book, because otherwise people won't buy your book. But if you want to, just give us a little bit of an insight into a couple of the stories that piqued your interest.
Yeah, absolutely. I did a lot of historical research, and one thing I realized in that research is that the history of spirit investigation and sort of spirit communication in Canada is really rich. It's really interesting. So in the sort of late 19th, early 20th centuries, there are all these stories about prominent Canadians and prominent Torontonians who got really into this idea of communicating with the dead. You see a lot of people famously the Prime Minister of Canada, William Lyon Mackenzie King, was a sort of closet spiritualist and was conducting seances, throughout his late adult life. But what I learned is it's not just him. There were a lot of people. Mary Fulford, the widow of a prominent senator, was holding a lot of seances. She actually introduced King to the idea. And I also found this fascinating story of a man in Toronto in the 1870s who unfortunately died as the result of a seance gone wrong. He got wrapped into, he started attending seances. He became really interested. And one of the reasons he kept going back was when he went to these seance rooms along King Street here in Toronto, he kept seeing prominent Torontonians, so men who were like leaders, political leaders, captains of industry. And so he took it as, very legitimate, and he really saw how popular it was. Unfortunately, he fell in with a fraudulent medium who promised to give him a spirit manifestation, so promised to actually manifest the face of his friend, and he promised that his dead friend would not only manifest, but write answers to questions in letters made of light in the air. It was an incredibly compelling promise. And so they went to a hotel here in Toronto, and they started the seance, and he saw this ghostly face. And then he started hearing the medium screaming for help. And what happened was the medium was using white phosphorus to create a sort of ghostly glow. It was fraudulent. And the thing about white phosphorus is, under the wrong conditions, it's extremely flammable. And so it started a fire, it caught the building on fire. This poor, lovely man, he actually saved the medium's life, even though he was a fraud, by scooping up the burning material and putting into a bucket of water. He probably saved the building. And in that time period, Toronto had a lot of major and very destructive fires. So it was very heroic. But the white phosphorus, it's really nasty stuff. If it gets on the skin, it burns you deeply. And so he wound up with these horrible burns and he eventually died. And so that was Canada's first fatal seance in the 1870s.
Wow.
It's a wild story, and I found a lot of stories of this type. Like, Canada has this really fascinating paranormal history, this real history of investigation and discovery, and unfortunately frauds, but also successes. And it's really, I found a ton of fascinating history. It was, to me, this was a surprisingly rich subject. Every time I sat down to write a chapter, whether it was about, and my chapters were about different things. They were about channeling, or about haunted dolls, or about automatic writing. Every time I had a topic, I would think, gosh, this topic, it's so narrow. I'm not going to find anything. I found everything. Every time I found too much to write about. It's such a rich history of our desire to contact the dead and our investigations into the paranormal. There's so much here. The book isn't just about Canada. It is about sort of the whole world, but a lot of it wound up focusing on Canadian museums and Canadian history. And I found that it's just such a rich history for us. I was really surprised.
Yeah. So I have a couple of points about what you just said. Number one, I know why so many people did seances back in the day, because they did not have a TV.
I agree with you.
It was as simple as that.
What's interesting is, if you look at early seances, at like how they were conducted, a lot of people were writing, the rules of a seance, how to have a successful one. And especially before the 1920s and before the sort of rise of mass media and movies, often the procedure involved sitting in the dark for like an hour before anything was expected to happen. You would sit in a seance circle in the dark and just wait. And you would wait an hour or more. I read some descriptions of people waiting 3 hours before they experienced phenomena. Can you imagine a modern person doing that? I mean, maybe you can, because you're used to paranormal investigations where you sit in the dark. But to me, like,
as soon as that happened, people were going, okay, I'm
right? Like, our attention, we do not have that attention span anymore.
No, absolutely.
And it's, and also one of the chapters of the book is about spirit photography, which is a big trend from like the 1860s through like the 1920s. And it's really interesting, because if you look at those photographs now, a lot of them are pretty obviously faked. They're pretty obviously double exposures. And, to our eyes, it's so obvious, because, the people are the wrong size, or they're all, the angle is wrong. They're looking the wrong way. It's clearly a double exposure. But it's because our understanding of media and technology has changed so much. In the 1860s, most people had never been in a photograph, let alone taken one. Whereas today, we take millions of photos collectively, globally, every single day. Like, there are now more photos taken by humans in existence than there are stars in the galaxy. Like, that's how many we take. And so our understanding of the world has shifted so much, which means that how we view the supernatural and the paranormal shifts along with it, and what we look for and where we investigate. This has changed so much with who we are and what we can do, and that really fascinates me.
Yeah, and I'm a member of quite a few paranormal Facebook groups, obviously, and there's a lot of people that post photographs and go, "What do you think's in the background? Yeah, where's this person come from?" And that a lot of it is double exposure or lens flare or whatever. And I actually teach a course for a company that are based in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and I do it on paranormal equipment. So week 1, I do cameras and audio. Week 2, I do like the the devices that we use in everyday life. So the EVP, not the EVP, the EMF detectors, because they can be used in commercial environments. Like if there's radio masts and stuff like that, they can pick up EMF. So it's all about the diagnostic equipment in week 2, or the official stuff that you can buy for construction and stuff like that we use in the paranormal world. Week 3 is the pseudoscience equipment, the REM pods, the cat balls, and all this kind of stuff. And then week 4, I go back to the old-fashioned stuff of the Ouija board, the pendulum, the dowsing rods, and that kind of stuff. And I will call a spade a spade. Yeah, if people go, "Oh, the cat ball went off," I do a inner sigh and go, "Okay, where did you put it? If you put it on the floor, the chances are you've caused a vibration that set the cat ball off." Yeah, and stuff like that. And I'm so logical and quite abrupt with some of the answers that I provide. But if you're going to use something, you have to use it correctly. Like if you've got a stone windowsill, put it on a stone windowsill, because if you kick the bottom of the wall, with it being stone or concrete or what, the vibration's not going to go up like a dozen bricks. So put it somewhere where if it goes off, it's going to be a genuine interaction. Don't put it on the floor where somebody can kick it, been there, done that, and then you just see a load of flashing lights going down the corridor. So people use these, but they don't realize about the false positives that can be occurred. If we do an investigation, everybody has to put their phone on airplane mode. If they don't want to do that, they will leave their phone at the base station, because we can't afford to have any false positives caused by a text message coming through or call coming through. So we try to narrow down the amount of false information that we can receive. We don't use walkie-talkies. We have them, but we don't use them for exactly the same reason. If you press a walkie-talkie next door to a REM pod, it's going to set the REM pod off.
Yeah.
So, and that's the kind of way that you have to look at it, and you have to like stick to your guns, and sort of like you have to be able to justify what happened and why it happened. So we do have devices that have gone off that we cannot explain why they've gone off. Yeah, we have something that's called a flux 2, which is a triangle. It's got a yes-no. So you have to literally be on one side of the triangle for it to activate. If you come at, like from the side, it's not gonna go off. And we've had a couple of interactions where it's gone off, and then we've had to test it to see where the area of like EMF kind of thing is. So did we accidentally set it off? And most of the time we're at the wrong angle, or we're stood too far away from it. So we can't explain it.
Yeah, and it takes a certain amount of rigor, doesn't it, to really sort of keep all of those variables under control. And also, I imagine you have to also be very conscious of yourself and of not wanting to take, just because you want something to have existed, to be sort of conscious of when you might be biased and correct that to the best of your ability.
That's it.
Right? There's a lot to it.
And if you kick something, or if your stomach grumbles, come out and say it. Yeah. If you fart, come out and say it, because if somebody else is reviewing the evidence and they hear that, they're going to put a question mark by it. But if you go, "Oh, yep, sorry, that was me. I had beans for dinner," then they can debunk it straight away.
Yep. And I think it can be difficult to do that too, in certain circumstances. One of the things I did was I attended a table turning workshop. And table turning, sort of in the 19th century, 1850s especially, was really popular as a way of spirit communication. It's when everyone sits around a table, places their hands on the table. This predates the Ouija board, but it's a similar concept. It's the idea that the table will be shaken and moved by the spirits. And it was really fascinating in its time, because it was investigated by Michael Faraday, the English physicist and chemist, did quite a bit of research into it and how it worked. And although, they never conclusively proved or disproved spirits, it did lead to the discovery of the ideomotor effect, which is really interesting. But table turning is still practiced today. And so, of course, I went to a workshop. And it was this really fascinating thing where, at a certain point, we've been doing it for a long, long time. And it was sort of it was like you said, that long period of doing nothing and being sort of bored that really is part of that process. And then eventually it did start to shake. And I was really questioning, like, where is this shaking coming from? Is it us? Is it something else? It was very unclear and very fascinating. And then eventually, what happened was our table did tilt up, and it tilted, and it was quite dramatic. It was a very exciting moment. I was sitting there and I was experiencing it. And then all of a sudden, I became aware that I was holding it up. And I wasn't doing it on purpose. It had tilted. We all had our hands on it. But I realized that, all of us had our fingers on it so lightly. And now it was in this tilted position. And I realized the weight was in my hands. And I was the one holding it up. I was the one making it seem to tilt at this point. And I hadn't done it. But now I knew if I would take my hands away, it would fall. And I had this very odd moment because I knew if I removed my hands, it would fall. I knew that at this point, nothing paranormal was happening. But everyone around me was there and was so excited that I had this moment of, should I take them away? I don't want to crush everyone. I don't want to disappoint everyone. And then, of course, I did take my hands away because I wasn't trying to fool anybody. But it really made me realize that there is an amount of social pressure when people really want something to happen and they really want something definitive to happen. And again, I hadn't lifted the table. That had happened collectively, and it might have been paranormal. It's really hard to say. But once it was up, I was the one who dropped it. And like there was a real pressure, not explicit. Nobody was telling me not to do it, but there was this like social pressure not to ruin it for everybody. And it must be a challenge sometimes to, really stick to your guns and say, no, we're not going to see anything that's not real. We're not going to see anything that's not happening. We have to be objective about this. I imagine that can be difficult.
Yeah, and we actually did a séance at an investigation a while ago. And when we posted the video, one of the first comments was, "Oh, you're playing with toys now, are you?" And then we just commented, "Watch the rest of the video." Because as soon as they saw it, they stopped watching it.
Oh, wow.
And they went, "What do you mean?" And I went, "Look at the rest of the video." And we actually had the three people doing the séance were blindfolded.
Mm-hmm.
So there was no internal manipulation.
Oh, interesting.
For them to move the planchette.
And did the planchette with blindfolds on, did the planchette spell out real things?
Didn't move.
Yeah. We actually did the same experiment as part of the book. There's a chapter on Ouija boards, which I find fascinating. It was actually sort of my starting point for writing because at one point in my career, we did a museum event that was sort of about historical methods of fortune telling and connecting with the dead. So we did Ouija boards and we did tea leaf reading and we did crystal balls, and all of it was in this sort of, museum-y way where we educated people and then they could come in and try it, and they all, it was a great experience. And I found that people they loved the crystal balls, they loved the tea leaf readings, and they were terrified of the Ouija boards. So I wound up writing about, why is that culturally? Why is this object scarier than others to people? And there's a lot of like media reasons for that. But it was really interesting because one of the things I wanted to know was, how do they work if you're blindfolded? So I got a group of friends who often does a games night together. And I said, all right, we're going to do a really weird board game. And so we used the Ouija boards and we got some very coherent answers. And then we did them blindfolded. And just like you, we got no coherent answer at all, which I thought was really fascinating.
Yeah. And I think if people are not blindfolded, even though people do not realize they're doing it, the subconscious is probably moving it to where they want. So, like I say, to blindfold somebody, you're taking away that sense because you're then not going to know if the planchette is moving, where it's going to. So, we love doing stuff like that because it does put that kind of stuff to the test.
And I love that kind of stuff because I think even though it doesn't necessarily answer a paranormal question, it is so revealing about how the human brain works. And if there's one thing that I took away from writing this book, it's that our brains are so weird and so interesting, and they do all of these things subconsciously that are beyond our awareness and are so fascinating. So I think that's a really interesting piece of this whole puzzle is we're investigating our world. We're also, to a degree, investigating our own minds and our own perception of the world. And I think that's
Exactly.
very worth doing.
Absolutely. And like I say, if you decide that you want to write book 2 or book 3, then please feel free to reach out and I will give you some really honest answers on pieces of equipment that I've seen and been used in the past.
I would love that. That's wonderful.
Absolutely. Okay, and we are coming towards the end, unfortunately. Yeah, I'm actually can't believe that we've been talking for over an hour.
It's flown by. Thank you so much for having me. This has been fascinating.
Okay, so the killer question. When's the book out? Where can people buy it?
Yes, so the book is out next month. Its official release date is November 7th, but actually you'll be able to find it in a lot of bookstores, especially in cities before then. But officially by November 7th, you should be able to find it anywhere fine books are sold. You can buy it on Indigo, you can buy it online. It's called A Ghost in the Room, Supernatural Adventures in Historic Houses by me, Ann McDougall.
Oh, that is you. Oh, yeah, right. That's why you're here. So I will arrange for you to sign a copy and send it to me if that's okay.
I would love that.
We'll arrange something. Okay, Anne, it's been an absolute pleasure. I could talk to you for another hour, but unfortunately, I do have to go to the store to do some chores.
Well, same. Thank you so much.
No problem. Like I say, it's been an absolute pleasure. You have a great rest of the day, and we will definitely be talking in the near future. Thanks very much. Take care.
Thanks, Lee. Bye.
Bye-bye.